I feel as if my life is toil to no end.
Do I make an imprint in this world?
Others flourish, but I just stay alive.
I create value, but I see only subsistence.
Can I find meaning in a meaningless world?
Can this really be all there is?
Am I really worth so little? Alienation.
Communism is social ownership.
You're watching the Adam and Sheridan Show video podcast number 30. This is the real number 30, not the fake number 30, which was number 29. Last month. We're filming at Brazil Craft Beer and Wine Lounge because I'm finishing up a project here. But today we're talking about alienation.
For those of you who don't know what alienation is, we've decided to give a summary of the history of the theoretical background of alienation and also some definitions. So we'll start off with some of the history.
All right, so in our History of Alienation segment, we're actually having an Adam and Sheridan show first. Adam is behind the camera, which is great. But essentially, alienation started out as an idea most notably by George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. I had to read his name because it's long in German. Who believed that man's truth was only to be found in context of his relations with other people. So when one moved in the world, one found one's truth and actualization and realization, or whatever you wanted to call it, in their relations. However, that created a culture which was then kind of imposed back on them. So when one moved around this culture, it was kind of used against their natural relations, their natural instincts of how they would relate to the world. After this, famous new Hegelian, who influenced Marx greatly, who is Ludwig Feuerbach, who actually thought of alienation in a completely different way. He said alienation is strictly a religious experience. So what people would do is take their humanness, put it onto some God figure, and then worship that God for those qualities. So essentially what they were doing was literally taking their own qualities, making them foreign, making them alien, and then having that entity then turn around and kind of impose a certain way of being back onto them, which was a really interesting idea of how it was viewed. And Marx was, even though he was heavily influenced by these people, he was influenced in his refutation of their ideas. He took Hegel and Feuerbach and understood that what the philosophies had in common was that if man's relation to the world is contrived, then one is alienated from it. One is not relating to the world in a natural way. They're not realizing their potential as a human being. And it's kind of one of the more touchy-feely aspects of Marx's philosophy, believe it or not.
Excellent historical summation, Sheridan. But what exactly is alienation? It affects all of us. Well, as with all of Marx, this is going to require notes right here, so I'm going to be referring to them. Alienation, according to Karl Marx, involves human relations in which the participants do not have control over what it is they're doing. Marx claimed that the cause of alienation was the dividing up of the population into classes. Now, under capitalism, as we've mentioned before, that is the working class and the bourgeoisie, which is the owning class. And he divided up alienation into 4 different categories, and I think you'll recognize some of these. The first one is alienation of the worker from his own work, the product of his labor. In other words, when he shows up for work all day and spends 8 hours on the assembly line, he doesn't get to take home all of the things that he makes. Those go to the owners of the production and are sold for a profit. The second is alienation from working itself, the process of working itself. Now, the worker doesn't actually have the ability to go to a factory or an office or anywhere like that and say, I think today I'm going to make tables, chairs, and footstools. And then come in tomorrow and say, I think I'm going to make sofas, love seats, and G-strings. No, he has to make exactly what he's told to make by his employer. So he's alienated from the very creative process of deciding what to do when he works. He's become sort of a cog in the machine. There's also alienation of the worker from himself. Since humans are social animals who have the ability to think of the needs of society in general, and not just ourselves, workers under capitalism are further alienated because their work is not designed to meet human needs, but rather the private profit interests of the bourgeoisie. You've talked about this over and over again. And finally, D, or 4, alienation of the worker from other workers, which Sheridan alluded to a great deal. We don't really look at other workers as human beings. We see them as competition for jobs. Because if they get the job that we're after, that means we're unemployed and we don't have any money, we don't survive. So not only are we competing for jobs with our fellow workers, but once we get that job, we reify it. We say this job is our identity, it's what keeps us alive, it's what sustains us. So those are 4 ways that Marx outlined that workers are alienated. And I think Sheridan and I will have a few words to say about that.
What do we have?
I'll have a glass of the finest product of your labor, please. Good for mulling things over.
What you mulling over?
Alienation, you heard of it?
Have I heard of it? One night when I was a child, these little gray men came into my room. They took me up into their spaceship.
No, not aliens. Alienation.
Oh! No.
Come with me, my friend. Well, now that we know what alienation is and where it came from,
Yep.
why should you care? Why would you be watching this podcast right now? And why will you always watch every one of our future podcasts?
And share them prolifically.
Yes.
What I think the important thing to know here is alienation is kind of a way that society relates to each other. And now at this point in society, I think we're relating to each other largely as consumers, and that's it. We don't really view ourselves as workers. We just kind of hate what we do most all day. And that's essentially our lives. We consume things, we are made to consume things, we judge by how we consume things, we talk about what we consume. And I'm not sure we're existing outside of that. Or if we are, we're spending large amounts of time that we could otherwise be spending relaxing or with our families, trying to create this other way of interacting with people as artists, as scholars, if you're not employed as either of those. So it's kind of weird how we relate and how we exist in this world.
And I read an interesting quote, actually just earlier today in my preparations for this, which said that, to summarize the quote, it said that there was a demarcation line between the dream world and the reality world, when no such line need exist. The only reason that it exists is because right now we have a very limited opportunity to really do anything besides that which sustains our life. We must, society dictates that we must sell our labor or our labor power in order to earn a wage to pay for our food and our shelter and our clothing, etc. If we don't do that, we will starve to death.
And now there's kind of a little bit of a side note as far as, not a side note, but another thing we kind of hinted at as far as alienation in kind of the opening of our show, that when we're relating in ways like this, like when we're relating to our labor as something outside of us, something that's compulsory and something that largely goes somewhere else, we don't feel fulfilled in it. We don't feel like we are being the person that we can be.
Because we aren't. Because if you, one of the tenets that I described in the introduction there, which described how Marx viewed alienation in terms of the worker and how he relates to his own work. Mm-hmm. In other words, it's not simply the fact that the worker does a job that he doesn't like. Mm-hmm. It's that the actual components of the work. Mm-hmm. Let's say he's on an assembly line and his job is to screw in a particular nut or bolt into something, and then it goes on to another worker who does another component of that labor. His labor has now actually become micromanaged. He's turned into the equivalent of a robotic arm or an extension of a robot, which is a non-human entity.
Yeah.
He doesn't even create something in full. He's simply a part of a larger creation. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, okay, fine, that's all well and good for factory workers, but what about engineers and architects and things like that, where they actually do build things whole? Well, guess what? They're dictated by the laws of capitalism too. They can't go around, unless they're very wealthy already, and build whatever it is they want. They have to build something in which there is demand for it, and which another entity that owns the means of production can take that idea and sell it to the consumers.
But you have an interesting thing. I think I think there is non-alienated labor in small forms. Labor like this. So this is owned by an entrepreneur. This Brazil is owned by an entrepreneur who created it himself, created a coffee shop himself, and he feels very fulfilled in his work because this was his thing. The work that I'm doing with him is me being slightly self-employed as a contractor out, and our work, what we do here. Takes up a lot of time from our families, takes up a lot of effort on our part, but we do it because we care. We do it because it's something that's interesting to us. So I think in small ways you can avoid alienation, but once you get to the larger world, once you participate and thrive in any way, you then become, you either sell the company or there's only one person who feels actualized, and then the rest of the people then are alienated from their labor, which doesn't happen in smaller companies because everyone has direct contact with the owner, feels like they are personally invested in it. So I think alienation is kind of a large-scale thing.
And don't forget,
I would argue.
Well, don't also forget that those who own small businesses like Brazil and Forte here in Jamestown, they're actually part of a class called the petty bourgeoisie, which is a subsection of the ruling class, which only owns enough production means to sustain itself as it currently exists. So in other words, it doesn't have enough money to reinvest to expand and grow the way, let's say, Walmart does. It only has enough to recreate its own business. So it's
also limiting. There are only a few people and a few businesses that can thrive as independent businesses in certain areas. Some more touristy areas might be able to have more small businesses, but most of the time you have a few small businesses and then larger organizations. So, while they may not be a revolutionary force, they might be, at least not alienated. So, good for them in that way. But it's not something that's possible for the rest of the population.
And one thing to think about is, how does this have an effect subconsciously on one's psychology?
When you're at work, think of how you relate to other people, either your coworkers, the customers, if you're in customer service. Think about how you relate to your bosses. Think about the culture that this creates, and if that ever turns off, if it does, how, think about how alienation kind of affects you in your life. And if you see something, talk to us. Let us know. This is a new concept for us, relatively, that's very interesting. And I think not talked about recently.
No.
Even by socialist circles. Alienation isn't talked about too much anymore. But I think it's interesting because it's more actionable, how you exist with others in the world.
And to relate it to socialism, the idea under socialism is that you don't have to sell your labor power for a profit to the owning class. Your means are provided for because of the mega wealth that capitalism has produced for us. It's then owned collectively, and now, based on your abilities and your interests, you now can pursue those interests and contribute not only to your self-actualization, but also to the fulfillment of society as a whole. And that is what socialism aims to do. Capitalism cannot provide that.
Check us out. First, email us if you have any comments about the show. It's going to show up on this table here. Wonderful hand-built table.
Yes.
AdamandSheridanShow@gmail.com. Check us out on Facebook.
The Adam and Sheridan Show is our name on Facebook. Also, subscribe and like us here, YouTube.
Twitter, @AdamandSheridan. What else do we have?
Well, we do have our beautiful radio show, which
WRFALP.com.
Yeah, and also 107.9 FM if you're in Jamestown. You can listen to it on the radio Fridays at 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. and Sunday mornings 11 a.m. All right, I'm Adam Courtwright.
I'm Sheridan. Stay active.
glass of your finest product of your labor, please.
Gotcha.
Wait.
Actually, we don't have anything. So, no, you need to say,
I was gonna say,
good
you're waiting
for
for a
mulling
line.
things over. Yeah, good for mulling things over.
Okay, we'll try it.
Okay?